Over 60 million people are displaced today, more than any time in the last 70 years. That is 1 in every 122 people. This tells us something deeply worrying about the peace and security of our world. It says that for all other advances, this type of human insecurity is growing faster than our ability to prevent or reverse it.
Tu sais que je vais sembler, certains ne changent pas.
Both my parents came over from, my mother came from Turkey, where she was born, Istanbul, and my father was born in Armenia. They did not know each other. They met here in the United States. My mother had to relocate. She went to Paris and then she went to New York. My father came straight to Canada from Armenia. Although he did go through a few other places, orphanages and things, because his parents were both killed. I wish I had more pictures to show you, but most of the things that they came over with were confiscated. So they had very few things with them.
Over 2 million people were displaced. Almost half of them, maybe, we don't know exact numbers, as I said, were basically killed or died because of that process. Otherwise they would not have died unless for natural reasons, the elderly. Then of course many of them were uprooted from their own families, usually young children and women of marriageable age. They were forced to have new identities, and then others became refugees. Whatever you call it, it should be condemned. And basically reducing it into one word basically makes it very, very problematic.
The most difficult thing for me to even recognize is that my father was put in a potato sack and he was carried through all kinds of land and sea. He was hidden there because he was a little boy, and people from in the village who did survive are the ones that carried him as if it was a bag of potatoes. This picture of my dad amazes me because he was the only survivor of his family, and he came across and what he did was make a life for himself and in a new world, and became very successful. My father worked in a factory. My mother stayed home, and somehow or another they made a living and then started a business, and they did very well for themselves. I was very proud of them. These are pictures that were taken here years and years ago, as you can tell by their clothes. This is my mom, her two sisters, and this is a picture of my father with his child, youngest child, and of course a truck that he had purchased. Because he was an Oriental rug dealer here, he taught himself how to be a salesman and do carpeting. And this is a picture of him sewing an Oriental carpet in his business, where he did very well.
All refugees are treated as, as unwelcome people. It's a fact of being a refugee. It takes a generation maybe for the people to be accepted by the new host countries, to see that not everybody who is coming is a crook. because usually that feeling is very widespread, that people who come from outside take jobs, bring wages down, they are the cause of disease, they are the cause of, other society problems like unemployment, etc. Like many sons of immigrants in this country say, we don't want immigrants anymore, although their parents or their grandparents were actually immigrants who came to this country. So I think that's a very, and it's for a sociologist to talk about this, that's a very frequent expression of xenophobia, this kind of suspicion towards others, outsiders, that all the refugees basically come.
Yes, there were, because we were a small community, the Armenians, where I lived and was born, and we were kind of looked down, and we had to make ourselves get out of that type of
stigma?
Yes, stigma, and make sure that everybody knew who we were and that we were there to stay.
Will you continue to pass on the story of your parents' escape?
Yes, certainly, of course I will, because that was an amazing thing that they did. For them to escape and to find a new life across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the way they came, it's amazing that they did what they did.
Respect towards everybody, that there are no better and worse cultures. There are different cultures, and those different cultures have their similarities and their differences, and let's try to find out more about them. And when we are comparing them, it's only to understand them better, not to classify which one is better and which one is the worst.
So many more people have stories just like Susan Mardiros, whether they share their own personal stories or that of their parents, grandparents, or ancestors. Having had the chance to interact with first-generation refugees, I've come to understand that every story is different and traumatizing in its own way. From Armenian to Syrian refugees, there are millions of families hoping, praying, and working towards a promising future.
I feel for these people because the hardships that they are going through are the ones that I heard from my parents. It's very difficult, and I think it has become more difficult in this day and age because of all the politics that are going on. And I hope that these things can be taken care of so these people can find a home where they can raise their children and be happy here.
I'm from Iraq. Syria.
I'm from Syria.
Syria.
Afghanistan.
Syria.
Susan Mardiros is not the only person with a story. So many more refugees are fighting for their freedom, safety, and health. We can only hope that making these stories known will spread the awareness of the refugee crisis. We are all humans with hearts. Now's the time to start listening to them.